Hi, my name's Derek and I'm a Senior Developer Advocate at AWS. Today I'm going to take you on a journey of how you can accelerate your application development lifecycle. So why is this concept of application acceleration so important? Today, competition has never been greater in a world where apps are everywhere. You need to stand out. And to do that, you need to delight users, and to do that, you need to get user feedback quicker. So you need to release your app quicker, but it also has to work. We usually do this by minimizing development waste, by automating our build and deployment pipelines, and by spending less time creating non-value add code like app scaffolding and more time in that next killer feature. And we're going to do that in a few clicks, more or less. Is that such a crazy expectation? What if you actually could do this? Not only that, but those clicks would be reproducible and saved as a reusable template, so you could deploy across multiple backends. And whatever your area of depth, may it be front-end, back-end, or even full stack, across mobile and web, you could easily build a powerful, fully featured, scalable, and fault-tolerant backend for your application. Well, today, I'm going to show you how with AWS Amplify. So what is AWS Amplify? Well, for those who haven't come across it, I'm going to do a quick refresher. Amplify has been around for about 3 years. It's a set of tools and services for web and mobile developers to build scalable, full-stack applications powered by AWS that supports native, Android and iOS, web frameworks like React, Angular and Vue, as well as cross-platform apps like React Native and Flutter. There are two main parts to Amplify. The first part is the open source part, which is available on GitHub. So it's a great place to meet the community, raise issues, and even fix PRs yourself. Or there's the AWS Console part, where you can host and manage your application. Diving into the framework part a bit more, we have the CLI, where you can scaffold out your backend by generating CloudFormation scripts and deploying these into an AWS account. And also we have client libraries, which provide features and APIs to talk to that backend from a choice of front-end tech, as well as a set of reusable UI components, therefore maximizing the code you don't have to write. Then we dive into the other main part, the Amplify Console. You could do things like connect up your source repository to create a static site generated with tools like Hugo. This will introspect your code and boom, you will get a build and deploy pipeline behind a public URL right away. Also, the ability to manage and amplify CLI created backend via the services that have been created is available through the console. So in summary, Amplify before this year's reInvent looked like this, where you could develop and add features, what we call categories to your app, like authentication, authorization, data store, or predictions for AI/ML, and the CLI to generate and deploy the CloudFormation templates, the libs to connect and then create your UI. Then there's delivery pillar, where you can view and manage the individual services created by the CloudFormation. However, when we listen to customer feedback, there is an ask for two main things. One, it would be great to have a single pane of glass view into your backend without having to click into the underlying services. And two, it would be awesome if not every dev needed an AWS IAM account access, but could still work on the application backend. So we listened and announced that reInvent 2020 was the Amplify Admin UI. It takes the acceleration capabilities already there and 10x's them by providing that single pane of glass into your backend app and allowing developers without AWS accounts to work on it. This changes the Amplify offering by adding a visual way to create those backend services that complements the existing CLI, adds a new management layer where you can control user access to your app, adding a content management feature and the ability to delegate access to developers who don't have access necessarily to an AWS account. So that's a refresher over. Let's show you how to build something with Amplify. So what am I building? I often go shopping, and with a rough idea of what I need, I frequently forget. So let's build a shopping list management app to help me remember. So here we are my shopping list app. I've got Visual Studio Code open, and I have a little React scaffold that I've created with Create React App. If I then go in and try and create a shopping list, I can do create one here, and if I click the add button, it should appear as a list down here, but I haven't wired up any actions. It's just the UI. If you look at the code, it's a typical React app with an app.js entry point, and at the top of app.js, I've got some code that I need to implement that are all the CRUD operations for this application. So create, read, update, and delete. And that's what I'll have to go and implement. As well as those operations, I also have a get items call at the top of the app, and I also, at the minute, it does nothing, and I have two components here as well. I have a component to actually add the existing list, and I have a component to show the list and to delete items from it. And there I'm just showing how I've built that out there. So this is the app that we're going to build today. We're going to add features to persist it locally, and we're going to not only persist it locally, but we're going to build more and more things with it. And like any good software dev, I have a backlog for my application. First of all, I need to add a data model and a persistence mechanism. Then I need to synchronize data across clients. Next step, I don't want just anybody to use my app, so I need to add an authorization and authentication layer. Then I need to add access to developers and content creators who don't have AWS accounts to help me build it. And then finally, I need to add a build and deployment pipeline. And can I do it in 20 minutes? Well, let's see. Let's go. The first stage is to model my data, and to do that, I'm going to use a new feature of the Amplify Admin UI called the Sandbox. So let's have a look at the Sandbox. This is the Amplify Admin UI Sandbox. You can get to it by going to sandbox.amplifyapp.com. I'm showing you here. And once you open up this page, you have two options. You can either host your web app, like I mentioned earlier, static hosting, or what we're going to do today is create an app backend. So I click Get Started, and that'll enable me to start my backend. So when I click this, I'm into the next page, which allows me to either create data, authentication, or file storage features to my application's backend. For this one, we're building a persistence mechanism, so we're going to choose the data version. So we click in here, and we're given a couple of templates that we can use. For this example, I'm actually going to use a blank schema. So clicking blank schema will bring up the data modeling screen. This is where we're going to build a data model that describes the data for our application. I just close this inspector panel to give me some more real estate, and then on the left-hand side, I'm going to click Add Model, and this is where we're going to call our first storage model. So I'm going to call this Shopping List Item, because this is the items inside my shopping list. So I give it a name. When I create a model, I always get a field called ID, and then I can add other fields. So I need a name for my shopping list items, so I'll call this item name. And beside the name, I can also give it a type. So as well as strings and ints, I can also pick scalar types, but for this one, string is what I'm going to go with. And then on the right-hand side, I can say the properties of it. Is it required and is it array? So for a name is required, I'm going to click, because without a name, a shopping list item is nothing. So that is the shopping list items model. Other things that I can do, I can add a container model for this shopping list items called shopping list, and I'll show you how to do that and add relationships. So the name of this item will be shopping list. Again, I'll get the ID already created for me. The next thing I want to do is give the shopping list a name. So same idea as I did with the shopping list items, I give it a name. And then the other thing, and is required, and the other thing I want to do is add a relationship. When you think of a shopping list has one or many shopping list items. So I'm going to model that relationship using the data modeling tool. I can also have a one-to-one or a many-to-many, but for this model it makes sense. So here I am, I've got my relationships. They've all been automatically filled in for me with a shopping list ID, and I've got that relationship nicely modeled. So once I'm happy with that, that's great. Other things I can do, I can share this model with other developers using this URL. so they can look at my model as well. And I can also set it as a template. So if people want to use it as a baseline for other models, they can do that as well. So I can do both of those things through this dialog. So once I'm happy with my model, I go to test. And so here's a little wizard that takes me through the next steps of building out my data model. I choose the platform that I want. Is it web, cross-platform, or even native? So for this one, I'm building a website, React web app. So I go next. This is optional, so I've already created my app. My app already exists, so I don't need to do this step, so I can hit next. Next is I'm going to do two things. I'm going to install the Amplify CLI, and I'm going to pull down this configuration locally. So I copy those commands across, go back to VS Code, and paste them into my terminal. So the first one is installing the Amplify CLI, so I can then run the CLI commands to also configure a backend locally. And the second one is the Amplify pull command. So this is pulling down my data model. It's generating the correct types from my schema that I've created, so I can then program with it inside my code. Creates a folder called models, and inside is all my types. Finally, what I need to do now is go to the next step and install the TypeScript library for Amplify, so I can actually interact with my models that have been generated so nicely for me, and then import my Amplify dependencies at the top of my app.js. So once that's all done, I hit next and start building out my CRUD operations. So again, very helpfully, the admin UI gives me the correct CRUD operations I need to use for each. So for the first one, I'm going to do a create. So I go over to the create tab. I copy the code as a guide. So first of all, I do the imports. So I've got data store. So data store is how I'm going to persist all my data. And then the second bit is a guide. So this is how I'm going to implement data store to do a create. So I'm going to add that into add item. So although it's just showing me a way, so I'm going to use my own coding standards and tidy it up a bit. If you remember, a shopping list item, the only thing that was mandatory was item name. So I'm removing all the rest of the code and just setting the item name for this shopping list item. So that's the create function done. The next function I'm going to do is the delete item. Again, I'm just going to code this in directly. So it's an await data store.delete. And then it takes in the item ID, and that's it. And then finally, I'm going to do the get. So this will get all shopping list items that are currently persisted, and it's a data store.query is how we get stuff via data store, and then we pass in a type. We can be more verbose and get specific items, but for this one, I'm just going to get all of them. So that's my CRUD operations done. Let's test it and see if it works. So here we are back in my app. Let's create some test data. Test item 1, add, and there we go. My list is now populating. Test item 2, add. So I've now got 2 items in my list. 1, 2. I then open up the developer console in Chrome. I go to applications, and I can inspect IndexedDB, where data store is storing all my data. So here I am looking at IndexedDB, and there are my 2 items persisted in the IndexedDB in Chrome. And if I want to say delete an item, let's see if the delete function works. So I delete test item 1, refresh my database, and then there we are. I've only got 1 item left that's persisted locally. So that's all working quite nicely, and it was really, really quick and easy to do. So that's my local data model and persistence mechanism sorted. The next stage in my app's development lifecycle is to build an API and persistent mechanism in the AWS cloud to sync any data stored across any instance of my application. So if someone, for example, wants to shop for the same list, we can divide and conquer the chore of shopping. So here we are back at our wizard that we've seen earlier. So to get the deploy to account working, this is simply we click the button and then we choose existing AWS account or a new one. For this one, I'm going to use an existing account I have, and this brings us into the Amplify Console. So for this, I need a name for my application. I need a region that I want to deploy to. And you'll notice that AppSync and DynamoDB will both be deployed for me. So this is how Data Store will then synchronize data between connected clients using AppSync and DynamoDB. Once that's deployed, we'll then be able to open up the Amplify Admin UI that's now connected to an AWS account. So the difference between this and a Sandbox is you get more features. If you look on the left-hand side, we can do things like data, authorization, authentication, add functions, a lot of stuff that we couldn't do with the Sandbox. Our original Sandbox that we created has now been locked down, and you can only get access to my data model via this account. So as that deploys and finishes, deploying AppSync and Dynamo, next step I need to do is pull it all down locally, so I can develop with this configuration. So it's handily displayed for me. I copy it, go back to Visual Studio Code, paste it in, and hit enter. So this will again pull down all the configuration that I need to develop locally and build out my application now that it is hosted on an AWS account. I choose how to configure my IDE, I choose what language I have, I choose the defaults for my source directory, my build directory, all of that I can happily choose the defaults. And then the final question is asked me, do I want to modify the backend with the CLI? Well, yes, I do, because that allows me to develop not only here locally, but also using the admin UI. So it gives me flexibility and a lot of different options to build out my backend. So now that's all done and I've deployed to an account. So if I do an Amplify status to check what my local development environment looks like, you can see that the API has been deployed. So it's the GraphQL API. There's the endpoint, and anything sent to that will persist data into my DynamoDB on AWS. Now we have our backend deployed into an account. Let's test our data sync to see if we can share data between different connected clients. So here we are back in the admin UI. We can manage application content. This is a new feature where we can create content inside the DynamoDB table that we've created. So I like cheese and crackers when I'm coding, so I'm going to build some test data around cheese and crackers. If you notice, this can also take Markdown, so it can also act as a content management system, and I'm adding just here crackers as well, just to get some representative data so I can test my application. Once that's done, I can bring up my, my test app, which I'm doing now. So I haven't changed any code. You'll see that all the operations are there. The only thing I've added is that data store got query in the fetch data. So when the application opens, it gets all the data available. So if I refresh, you'll see that it gets all the data available, which is cheese and crackers. Now, if I want to add additional items into that list, say I get thirsty and I want some milk, I add in milk to the list. You'll see it's reflected in Admin UI, but not inside my application until I actually refresh it. So I need to update that so I get the update right away. So how am I going to do that? So right in the start of my app, I'm missing an observer. So I need something to observe the data as it changes and fire an event. So I go to the documentation for Amplify. I go into the libraries. I choose data store because that's what we're using. I go to real time, and then it shows me how to observe data in real time. Again, I just copy the code, paste it into where it needs to go when my app starts, and then use that as a guide to start then fleshing out how to observe. So the first thing I need to change the data type that it's observing on. So I need to observe on a shopping list item, so I paste that in. The next thing is what function or action to do once I detect data has changed. So for this one, I'm going to keep it really simple. And when I detect a change to the underlying data, I'm just going to reload everything so we get the most up-to-date view of my data. So I do that by just calling fetch data again. Save that, and then let's go back to our application and see if that works. So now we can update let's see if we update cheese. Today I feel like cheese slices instead of a full block of cheese. So I'm going to go to cheese slices, hit save, and you'll see right away that it's reflected on inside my application. So that data syncing mechanism is working really well. Other things I can change, I can try and delete an item and see if that is also reflected. So there we go, I deleted milk, and that's also been removed from my application. So my data is in sync across my application, which is great. The next stage is to stop just anyone using and seeing my shopping lists. So let's add some security into my application. So again, we're back to the Amplify Admin UI, and we set up user authentication and user management, where you can set up users and groups to use my application. Here I configure it to say the first thing I want to do is log in using a username. I can also add Google, Amazon, Auth, phone numbers if I wanted to. I'm going to keep this simple and use username. I can then configure multi-factor, so MFA, decide how that would look. Does it use SMS? Does it use an authenticator app? And I can decide what messages it shows and stuff like that. Then I can figure how people can sign up. What details do they need to provide to sign up? And then finally, I can define how complex the password needs to be when users are setting it. All of this I can define, including the message as well that you get in an email or SMS. So if I hit save and deploy, this will build and configure a Cognito instance with all of those settings set. I can then use to create users and authenticate into my application. Here I am now going to create a sample user. Let's give it a unique identifier. It's Derek. Give them a real username, which we'll use to verify. So that's my email. And then a temporary password. So super secret password 234. Create user. So now I've created a user in my pool that has access to use my application. The next bit I need to do is I need to build a UI to challenge the users of my application. So let's do that. Back in Visual Studio Code, I simply want to reuse one of the Amplify UI components that I can just drop in. This one's called With Authenticator, and it comes from the UI React libraries. Once I pull it in an import statement, I then simply wrap my app with the With Authenticator component. So it's With Authenticator, open bracket app, close bracket, simple as that. And now I have a reusable sign in and sign up component that's ready for my application. Let's see what that looks like. Let's open up the application, and here's the component all ready to go. So let's test my username. So it's Derek, and password, super secret password. Sign in. It'll ask me to change my password, so another super secret password, and change my password, and then I can skip this verification step for now. So now I'm signed in, and only signed in people can use my app, and the app still works, and I can create test data and delete and create still works. So that's authentication, nicely added, no problem at all. And now finally, let's wire up a build and deployment pipeline for my shopping list app and give access to a team of devs to finish off the rest of the features. So here we are in the AWS Console, and we have an additional feature here called the Admin UI Management on the left-hand side. We click in that, we can do things like customize our domain, and what I'm going to do is add access control for my users. So I have two types of access control, full access or manage only. I've already created a user, and this with a valid email address, and give them manage only access. And here back in the Admin UI, you'll see that I have a subset of the features that I can use with the manage only access. I can create content, and I can validate, add and remove users and groups. So again, this is a very high level access. So if you don't need development access, then this is a good one to choose. But if you do need development access, then I can change this user. So I'm going to change this user to have full access. Changed, saved. Once it's persisted, I just need to relog back into the Admin UI, and this is what I'm doing now. Once I've relogged in, you'll see again that the fully featured backend services that I can add to my app are all there, and I can do so without access to the AWS account. I can also change the environments. So from stage A, I can create a new environment based on the templates that have been created, and I can also change my data model. So fully featured access into the admin UI to change that backend. Finally, I'm going to build my deployment pipeline. So I'm hooking into my GitHub repo where my code sits, choosing the right branch. Once I choose the branch, I go next, and it will introspect the code, work out that this is a React app, give me the right build file that I need to use. I just go next, I go save and deploy, and this will pick up the code from my repo and deploy it behind hosted and behind a URL. So there is my provision, my build, my deploy, all done, and a verify step. So that's my CI/CD pipeline, all done and dusted. And that's it. Let's double check our backlog to make sure we've got everything. So we've added a data model and persistence mechanism. We've synchronized data across clients. We've added in authorization and access to allow developers and content creators without AWS accounts to help build our application up. And then finally, we've added a build and deployment pipeline. And we've done it in around about 20 minutes, give or take. Let's have a release party. So what have we learned in the last 25 minutes? First of all, not everybody needs an AWS account to develop with the Amplify Admin UI. You can easily also create and switch between environments. You can build a CI/CD pipeline in a couple of clicks. And most importantly, you have a single pane of glass over your backend services that allows you to iterate very, very quickly. And then finally, the documentation is on point. All of this from Amplify that helps you remove waste in your application dev cycle and helps accelerate application delivery. But don't take my word for it. Go build something more exciting than my shopping list app. And here are some links to help. Amplify has a vibrant developer community. I really recommend connecting into it via Discord. The link is here. Also, keep learning beyond the summit with resources from AWS training and certification for DevOps. You can also explore labs, white papers, and other technical resources by downloading the AWS Ramp-Up Guides. Thanks for listening. My name is Derek Bingham. If you have any questions on today's talk, do feel free to reach out to me on the socials. And please don't forget to fill out the feedback and help improve future talks and topics. See you next time.